Hello, listeners, and welcome to State of the House. This is a biweekly podcast hosted by me, Jill Krowinski, the Speaker of the Vermont House. Each episode offers an inside look at Vermont politics, legislation, and the experience of working in the Vermont House of Representatives. We'll have conversations with legislators, staff, advocates, and Vermonters from all walks of life. State of the House brings policy discussions to the table in an engaging way. All right, so here we are, State of the House, our first guest for our first podcast, which is very exciting. Thank you for being here, Representative Martin LaLonde from South Burlington. You are now in your second term as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, right?
Yes, and thank you for putting me there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've served on that committee for a while, though, before being chair, right?
Yes, this is my 11th year in the committee, and I was for one term ranking member before I also became assistant majority leader, and then now second term as chair.
That's great. So we're going to talk about public safety because that is a big issue this legislative session, as it was last legislative session as well. But before we dive into policy, we're getting a feel for how we use this podcast to help educate and open up the building for people and doing little challenges with guests. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Martin, okay? So can you explain for our listeners how a complex bill or policy can get across the finish line and be successful in under 2 minutes? Molly, hit the timer.
Being successful in getting the bill across the finish line, well, you should line up supporters of the bill. You should know the topic area as well. You should probably, prior to a session, start working on the bill with stakeholders, because we do not have that much time as citizen legislators to get a bill passed. You get a walkthrough from Legislative Council. You have people explain why we need the bill, what problem are we trying to solve. We look at the language. We take the input, and then we ask our Legislative Council to modify almost certainly every bill that comes into the committee. It will not leave the committee in the same way it came into the committee. So you work closely with Legislative Council to modify the language of the bill, and then you hopefully quickly pass it, and you send it to the floor, and it gets over to the Senate, and you make sure that the Senate understands it's coming, and you already have done some legwork to make sure that they understand the importance of the bill, and the fact that none of their bills will get passed unless they pass my bill, sometimes. And then you hope that the governor will sign it. How'd I do?
8 seconds. Well, well done.
I missed some bits, but
Well done. No, that was good. That was good. Thank you. All right. Well, we won't ask you to sing I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. We can get into our core topic of conversation.
I wish that was the challenge instead.
Maybe we should do that for the next guest and
Yeah,
see how that plays out. Okay.
All
right. So on to public safety. Leading up to this legislative session, there has been a lot of work implementing the bills that we passed last year. A lot of us in our communities kept in close contact with our constituents about that work. I spent time not only in Burlington, but across the state hearing about public safety challenges. And I know you've been hearing a lot about it too, Martin. What do you think the biggest public safety challenges that we are facing right now in time?
There are so many challenges, and I mean, it really starts with where the root causes of crime are. And that's, people who don't have stability in their lives, who don't have homes, who may have drug addiction issues, substance use disorder, mental health issues, and they're not getting the help. And not to say that everybody who has a substance use disorder or a mental health condition is going to go into crime, but these are root factors, including poverty as well. There's a lot of reasons that people end up committing crimes. And it really comes down to stability as one big factor. And I think we went south during the COVID and also just what's happening at the national level, the tenor, there seems to be a lot of hate, a lot of anger, a lot of rage, and a lot of instability. So that's led to more public safety issues. There are more crimes. There's a perception that people don't feel safe, but that's definitely based on a reality. The statistics show that there's been an increase in Vermont in violent crimes, in thefts, retail theft, drug crimes. Drug use, there's not as many people are not being arrested for just possession right now because of other issues, which we'll presumably get into, which has to do with court processing of cases, of not having accountability. So I would say, having given all that background, the number one issue with respect to public safety is there seems to be a lack of accountability right now. We don't have the law enforcement to make sure that people have a risk of being caught when they commit an offense. That's one problem. If they are and they are charged in court, it takes them months, if not years, for there to be consequences for the behavior. Mm-hmm. And that does not deter crime. Really, accountability is lacking for when offenses are committed.
Yeah, that's right. So I think it would be helpful for listeners to hear a little bit about the legislation that we passed last legislative session and how that's being implemented. You talked about oversight and accountability. That is another priority for us this session. And what does that lead into as we look at public safety this session? Because they are very linked together.
We passed some significant laws and that were enacted this past year. And work went into it for the past 2-3 years, if not longer, but really led up to a number of significant bills being passed last year, addressing retail theft, addressing conditions of release, addressing bail, having a pretrial supervision program so that individuals who are awaiting trial can get supported so that hopefully there are not additional crimes or violations of conditions of release. So these are bills that we passed that are slowly taking effect. The other probably biggest initiative that we had last year was a boost in resources. So the Judiciary Committee, I think unlike the other 10 years, or 9 years, I should say, that I was in the Judiciary Committee, we really focused on the resources. We used to really defer largely to Appropriations Committee, which does a good job, and they would hear from all the right people, but we really got much more involved because we felt the best way to address the public safety issue is to get courts working better, is to get the criminal justice system working better. And when we looked at it, we felt that we've been under-resourcing the courts, the prosecutors, the defenders before COVID. I mean, for a long time. We just were not giving the necessary resources for cases to be heard quickly. So one of the biggest challenges, though, I don't know if you've gotten to that, or if you have that question.
Sure do. Go for it.
So jumping ahead, so there's definitely public safety issues still going on, obviously. Part of it is that what we have put into place is going to take some time. And I'll use the example of the resources. So we approved 3 additional judges, and that was in addition to an additional judge from the previous year. But those 3 additional judges that were approved by the end of June, they are just now being trained. So there's a process to nominate the judges. There's that process, and then the governor has to decide who to appoint. That didn't happen until late November, and now the judges right now are in training. So it takes a while to get those resources up and running. The same with prosecutors' offices and defenders. And there's actually a whole other issue that's problematic there, is that we're not finding the just like any other employer, we're not finding the criminal justice system is not finding additional attorneys or staff. It's really hard to staff. And I'm not sure what the answer to that one is. So we put the resources towards it, but it's taking time. It's also taking time for, I think, practitioners to understand what we've done with bail and conditions of release and the pretrial supervision. It just takes time for those things to move. That doesn't mean we don't have more to do.
Yeah. So with regards to the courts and resources and judges, the court backlog was part of the reason that inspired us to do this work in investing in the judicial system, in the court system. There was a backlog before COVID, and then COVID just made it 1,000 times worse. And so I think it would be helpful for people to understand when we say backlog, how many cases are we talking about, and how does that impact the system?
So I will first define what backlog means or should mean. And maybe different people have different definitions, but I think this is the appropriate definition. So the court has goals for disposition, meaning they want to have like 95% of basic misdemeanor cases resolved in 180 days. They want felonies resolved in 365 days. If cases exceed those guidelines, I would consider those cases to be part of the backlog because they're not making it in a timely fashion. Those time frames are reflecting what should be a timely disposition of the case, which goes back to what I mentioned before, which is accountability, that you want the consequences, whatever those are, it could be probation, treatment, or incarceration, close to when the offense or behavior occurred. So the backlog is just a measure of how poorly we may be doing as far as having those consequences close to the behavior. And so under that definition, like in December, we're talking about 13,826 cases statewide have not met those disposition guidelines. So significant.
So how does that impact access to justice? I mean, that sounds like a very large number.
Yes, I mean, it's an impact for victims, certainly. Mm-hmm. It's an impact for the communities that are not seeing individuals tried. What can happen is you can have individuals who are committing low-level crimes, retail theft, property crimes, trespass, not hurting property, and I know there's harm in those kind of crimes, but they're not the kind of crimes that we can hold a person without bail. Mm-hmm. And this is an important part of how this backlog is impacting us, is that so they're not held without bail, they're released on conditions, which is stay away from those stores that you stole from, it could be a curfew, different things, go to treatment, but frequently those are violated. But these individuals, we can't hold them without bail. And the only way we can impose bail is if they're a risk of flight. Now, we've modified the evaluation for whether somebody is a risk of flight. That was one of the laws we passed last year. And in fact, bail is being imposed on more individuals. That doesn't mean you want to hold the person because they can not pay bail. The concept is that it's an incentive for them to show up at court and behave so that they don't lose the $1,000 of bail or whatever is imposed. So the issue is that the backlog, we're not able to process those low-level cases quickly enough. Individuals are often out, and it's not most individuals, it's actually usually a handful, are committing more crimes before they're ever had their day in court. The other problem is that, in fact, more and more people are being detained pre-trial, and those individuals are innocent, until proven guilty, and their liberty is being denied. They are being held, and we've had a pretty significant increase in number of people being detained before trial. Just recently, I think I looked, and it was around 550. Prior to the COVID, it was like 100 people less on average. So those people are waiting, which these are the people that you want to have their court dates more quickly because they're being held. So that this is kind of a further problem of getting cases processed. There's so many factors.
There are a lot of factors here, and that play into this and play into the broader conversations that we're having at the State House, from housing to healthcare. Right. It is very interconnected, and so thinking about this session and where we pick up our work. Looking still at making potentially more investments in the system. What are some of the other policy pieces that you're planning on taking up?
So I think one of the levers, and it's a very important lever, is a follow-up on Act 180 from last year, which established a pre-charge diversion program. The basic concept is that we would like to divert more cases out of the criminal justice system, put less pressure on the court system. What we know is the appropriate case is going to pre-charge diversion or diversion, which is a restorative justice process, which is a community process. It's not in the courts. It often has the victim involved. It really is having the offender taking responsibility and trying to make amends. When that works, it's a much better outcome for the victim. It's a lot less costly. And we have experience in some communities where this works very well. South Burlington being one, Burlington, also Williston and Essex have done very well with this process. So just for example, in 2023, in Chittenden County, approximately 400 cases went to pre-charge diversion. And those are 400 cases that would end up in court and further cause backlog. What Act 180 did was expand that. It expanded that to be statewide. It has a transition to make sure the current programs continue to run, but we want to expand it to where it's not being used very much, to take pressure off the court, to have better outcomes and less costly. So one of our big initiatives this year is to make sure that that program gets off the ground. And that will be really for resources, not significant resources, but we have to make sure that we are properly resourcing that effort. I would say that's the number one, is how can we make the courts work better? And frankly, unfortunately, well, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate or not, but it's going to take some resources to continue to do that. Last year, when we really looked at how to get the courts running better, it was really a 2-year plan to build up the resources necessary to move cases. We'll look to other ways that we can fix things. There are some other ways. There's something called work crew, which we put into place last year in a law. The concept of work crew is often really early in the process when somebody is going to court with a criminal offense, that this is an opportunity to clear a case pretty early. The idea is that the sentence could be like up to 2 weeks of work crew. And if the person doesn't show up for that, they are taken directly to prison for that time that they were supposed to do on work crew. So they could end up with a 2-week prison sentence, but hopefully they'll instead show up at work crew. A lot of it used to be taking care of cemeteries around the state. But that's a way to clear cases early in the process and have accountability early. Again, that's a way to fix something as opposed to just resources, although that'll take resources too. The Department of Corrections is sorely understaffed, and they're having issues too. So,
in this building, we have like short phrases that we use for big policy areas, because the longer you're in the building, the more these big issues have nicknames or we call it something. And one campaign that's out there that has been a topic for a couple of years is Raise the Age. Can you explain what that is and what work is or is not happening around that this legislative session?
Yeah, so this session we've really jumped in deep into juvenile justice, which Raise the Age has to do with juvenile justice. So we have a system where if it's youth that do something stupid, commit an offense, that we don't want that to ruin the rest of their lives by having them have a criminal record. For certain offenses, and there are exceptions, the really bad offenses like murder, arson, and there's a list of 14 offenses, such offenses. Those cases go to criminal court for somebody who's 14 and up, the age. For other felonies and misdemeanors, if it's a juvenile, the case will go to family court. And in family court, it's confidential. There's not an incarcerative sentence. It's more rehabilitative. And the Department of Children and Families often works really hard to really help the individual get on the right path. So it's good to catch them young if they are getting in trouble. So the Raise the Age this was an initiative starting, I think, around 2017, 18. It increased the age of what we would consider somebody who would go into the juvenile court for what's called delinquency as opposed to a crime. It raised the age to 18 and under. Before it was 17 and under. This was supposed to be a process that led to 19 and under being treated in juvenile court. Again, there's a recognition of brain science that says that the prefrontal cortex does not really fully develop until mid-20s, and there's a lot of impulsive behavior, and we're trying to not have impulsive behavior ruin a person's life. although, if there's really bad behavior, they can be in criminal court. That's definitely the case. So the raise the age, we were supposed to go up to 19. That's been delayed. And so after first really diving in and understanding juvenile justice system generally, this week we took 2 days of testimony on raise the age and what we should do about that. And there were some witnesses that really would love to see us keep going on this. There are witnesses that, yes, think this is the right thing to do, but now is not the time, that we should delay it. I know that the governor's proposal for public safety would repeal the raise the age to 19 and try to deal with these individuals in this other process called youthful offender, which I will not spend the next 10 minutes talking about. But in any event, but I think really people are asking for a delay. People are asking for other adjustments to juvenile justice. And right now I'm working with our legislative council on several ideas to try to deal with that.
Right. So we're coming into this session and you've had some turnover on your House Judiciary Committee. And every biennium, we have a new group of members who come in who weren't part of the process last year or the biennium before, coming in with new ideas, new Democrats, new Republicans. How do you set the stage for working together at the beginning of session, and how do you start that process?
Well, I think just having the various witnesses who are experts in this explaining to us what they're dealing with in juvenile justice and criminal justice and public safety generally. And I think everybody seems to appreciate, well, first of all, that in the Judiciary Committee, we're kind of at the end of the pipeline where society has already failed and we're just dealing with the failures in society. As I mentioned earlier, we need to find housing for people and stability, et cetera. But that doesn't happen, and so it comes to us. And so the basic concept of accountability, I think that everybody in the committee, from the 5 Republicans to the 6 Democrats, are, I think, all on the same page, that there needs to be accountability. We certainly would like to see things fixed before the people get to the criminal justice system, but that's not what we get to deal with. There may be different viewpoints on how to get the accountability, but I think these are all rational folks in my committee. They're all smart. It's a great committee. There's some very different views of things, but I think ultimately, and letting everybody express those views is really critical, and we're not pushing down on anybody's views to try to come up with the solutions. We are chipping away at this. It's a really difficult problem that we're dealing with. There's so many aspects of it. But the basic idea is that we think that there should be consequences for certain behavior. There may be disagreements over what those consequences are, but there is that agreement on consequences.
All right. Crossover confessions. This is where we just find out a little bit more about members of the House. So Martin, can you share with our listeners, tell our listeners, outside the building, what do you do? What do you do for fun?
Oh, for fun. Well, I have some hobbies, but it seems like those hobbies go aside a little bit more than they should because I read a lot. I'm really...
What book are you reading right now?
I'm reading Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, and which is very good. And then I have a couple non-fiction books that I have going. One about the collapse of civilization in 1177 BC. It's kind of interesting.
So some light reading.
Yeah, light reading. And another one having to do with First Amendment, freedom of speech law. So you have to.
Wow.
So
really?
so when I try to put those aside, I do watercolor painting. I was the president of the Vermont Watercolor Society for 4 years. I just haven't. I'm hoping this weekend that I'm going to work on a painting. We'll see how that. The football season's almost done, so I have a little more time on the weekend. Lines are not in it anymore, so I hope to do some painting. I'm very proud of the fact that I have 3 paintings hanging in the State House. 2 of them have been donated to the State House. One is on temporary loan. Actually, I have 3 in my committee room as well, which is a little obnoxious. But I have other friends' paintings.
And we're in my office right now in the State House, and I am looking at one in my office that you painted, which is great. Could you tell us what it is?
That is a sugar shack. I was driving some part of Vermont and caught that in my eye and took a picture with my iPhone and eventually set that down on paper and for painting. So it kind of looks like what it looked like on the photo, but that's the idea of artwork. But I started out watercolor painting, and it kind of was related actually to my other thing that I like to do, but is hunting. I am a hunter, and I'm a member of a hunting camp in Michigan, and I had lots of old photos from that hunting camp that was created in 1918, and I used those as reference photos, and I did have a show of my hunting paintings a number of years ago in Burlington. And quite a few of them were hanging, a couple years ago when I shared a show here with Tom Stevens in the cafeteria, and some of the hunting ones were there. So combine that a little bit.
Awesome.
You know, kill things, paint things, you know.
Right, well, I think that's a wrap. Martin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to State of the House. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share it with your friends and leave us a review on your preferred platform. If you have requests for future guests or questions you'd like us to answer on the podcast, send an email to speaker@leg.state.vt.us. A special thanks to our guest, Representative Martin LaLonde, for joining us today. This episode was produced and edited by Molly Moore and hosted by me, Jill Krowinski. Thanks, and until next time.